Queer folk have been a quintessential force in history since the dawn of civilization, to the founding of queer societies, to the uprisings of Stonewall, to the legal cases solidifying gay rights. The LGBT has certainly had its fair share of wild and influential events. Today, we will be covering 47 of the most influential events in queer history. Before we begin, a few things that I want to get out of the way. 1. This video only covers queer history in the US. I am aware that there is history all over the world, but since I'm American, I am mostly fed American history. 2. There will be mentions of queerphobia, shootings, arson, and other very sensitive topics. If you do not feel comfortable watching this video, I completely understand. Feel free to click off whenever. 3. I will not be covering every single moment in queer history. I am only one person, let me breathe. And 4, I am indeed using a different mic, so if the audio sounds a bit different, that's why. Now that that's all out of the way, let's begin. Starting with number 1. The first queer society was founded. The very first queer rights organization in the US was the Society for Human Rights, founded on December 10, 1924 in Chicago, Illinois. The organization's goal was, as stated in their charter, quote, to promote and protect the interests of people who by reasons of mental and physical abnormalities are abused and hindered in the legal pursuit of happiness, which is guaranteed to them by the Declaration of Independence, and to combat the public prejudices against them by dissemination, a factor according to modern science among intellectuals of mature age. Sadly, the group was not meant to be, as only 1 year later, the group dissolved because the founder, Henry Gerber, was arrested for his publication, Friendship and Freedom. Friendship and Freedom was a bi-weekly newsletter that discussed queer issues of the era. Only 2 issues were ever published before the publication, and the Society for Human Rights was shut down. Gerber was arrested in 1925 for quote-unquote obscenity charges, and while the charges were dropped, the legal fees bankrupted Gerber and he was forced to liquidate all of his assets, including the Society for Human Rights. Even though it only lasted 1 year, the Society for Human Rights and its founder continues to inspire the queer community to this day, especially those affected by Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. Number 2. Sexual behavior in the human male is published. In 1948, biologist and sexual health researcher Dr. Alfred Kinsey published his article, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. In this study, Dr. Kinsey asked multiple males of varying ages and asked them if they have enjoyed any sort of gay activity at least once in their life. He found that, quote, at least 37% of the male population has some homosexual experience between the beginning of adolescence and old age, unquote. Among those who remained unmarried until age 35, Dr. Kinsey found, quote, almost exactly 50% have homosexual experience between the beginning of adolescence and that age, unquote. Not only did Dr. Kinsey discover that 1 in 3 men had at least one gay experience in their life, but that not every man who said yes was gay or bi. Many of them were indeed heterosexual. This shook society, as being gay was still demonized and illegal at the time. The article shows that not only do heterosexual people experiment, but that there was little to no difference in sexual behaviors and mindsets between gay men and their straight counterparts. Number 3. The Mattachine Society was founded. On November 11, 1950, one of the most influential secret societies for queer rights was founded, the Mattachine Society. The Mattachine Society was founded in Los Angeles, California by gay rights activist Harry Hay and was one of several early queer rights groups. The society acted as a sort of club, allowing gay and trans men to vent their frustrations to like-minded individuals. Other than that, they were often found protesting anti-queer law and rhetoric and even provided legal action for those who were arrested. According to the group, as well as an article by the National Park Service, the society, quote, focused its initiatives on the idea that government, religion, and psychiatry are agents of oppression, unquote. The group also had their own periodical called the Mattachine Review, starting in 1959. Things started to fall apart at a 1969 meeting, where members of the New York branch got into a heated argument with the leaders and left to form their own group, the Gay Liberation Front. Many people stopped paying attention to this group and many others post-Stonewall, and the people who remained continued to leave until the society declared bankruptcy in 1976. Even though the Mattachine Society did not survive long after Stonewall, their efforts laid the way for other organizations to flourish. Basically, the Mattachine Society walked so that the GLF, Equal Rights Movement, and the LGBT community as a whole could run. Number 4. The APA officially considered being gay a mental illness. In April of 1952, the American Psychiatric Association publishes the first edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-1. In the DSM-1, gayness was included as a sociopathic personality disorder, akin to sociopathy. This drew widespread backlash among the medical, psychological, sociological, and queer rights communities because there was a lack of evidence to prove that gayness was a mental illness, as well as being a queerphobic decision. Number 5. President Eisenhower prevents queer people from working in the U.S. government. Shortly after the introduction of the DSM-1, then-President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed Executive Order Number 10450, banning gay people from working in the U.S. government, claiming that they were seen as a security risk akin to alcoholics, drug users, and people with psychosis. Number 6. The Daughters of Bilitis was founded. About 5 years after the creation of the Mattachine Society, a similar society was formed, the Daughters of Bilitis. The Daughters of Bilitis was the first lesbian rights group in the U.S., and it was founded in San Francisco by Rose Bomberger. The group started off as a secret club for lesbians, a safe place from frequent bar raids. But after a large spike in members, it became a proper advocate and rights group. The group even had their own publication, The Ladder, starting in 1956 and continuing to the end of the national organization in the 1970s. Number 7. Dr. Kinsey publishes a second report relating to sexual behavior. In 1953, 5 years after his original report, Dr. Kinsey released his second paper relating to sexual behavior in the human female. This paper was similar to his original report, but this time he asked 600 women about their sexual behavior and compared the data to his findings of sexual behavior in the human male. These two reports together are referred to as the Kinsey reports and helped create the Kinsey scale. The Kinsey scale is a 7-point scale that measures how straight or queer a person is based on their answers in the Kinsey review. After being asked a series of questions, each participant would be given a number ranging from 0, exclusively heterosexual, to 6, exclusively gay, with some receiving an X, asexual/aromantic. Number 8. Dr. Hooker reveals a paper to the APA about gayness. On August 30th, 1956, psychologist Evelyn Hooker presented a paper about gay males to the APA at a convention in Chicago, Illinois. This paper, The Adjustment of the Male Overt Homosexual, administers a variety of tests to 30 gay men and 30 straight men with a similar age, IQ, and education level. The tests found that there was little to no difference in mental functioning and intelligence between gay and straight men. This completely surprised the APA. There was concrete evidence that gayness was indeed not a mental illness. Despite this, the APA continued to keep gayness as a mental illness in the DSM-1. Number 9. The case of 1 Inc. v. Olson is decided in court. In the 1950s, Los Angeles Postmaster Otto K. Olson required that all federal postal authorities seize the queer magazine 1, the homosexual magazine, because he believed the magazine to be, quote, obscene, lewd, lascivious, and filthy, unquote. The publisher of the magazine, 1 Inc., believed this to be a violation of their First Amendment rights. 1 Inc. then took Postmaster Olson to court multiple times. The first case took place in 1957, where it was determined in lower court that vulgarity is not protected under the First Amendment and that contexts of the magazine were indeed vulgar. The court cited the case of Roth v. United States for their ruling. That wasn't enough for 1 Inc., who then took the case to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, where they lost the case as well. According to the judge preceding the case, quote, although the magazine stated its aim was to provide educational and informative material, it has a primary purpose of exciting lust, lewd, and lascivious thoughts and sensational desires in the minds of the persons reading it, unquote. One story in particular seemed to help lead to this ruling, a story known as Sappho Remembered. Sappho Remembered was a story about a 21-year-old woman's journey of becoming a lesbian. The judge referred to this story as, quote-unquote, cheap pornography. 1 Inc. wasn't going to go down without a fight. They weren't ready to throw in the towel. They took the case to the U.S. Federal Supreme Court 1 year later in 1958. To their shock, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of 1 Inc., citing their decision in Roth v. United States as their reasoning. Number 10. Illinois became the first U.S. state to decriminalize being gay. On January 1, 1962, the U.S. state of Illinois, in a landmark decision, became the first U.S. state to decriminalize being gay. While gay marriage had yet to be legal, Illinois allowed people to participate in gay behaviors with less fear of being arrested. Number 11. The first Reminder Day is celebrated. Prior to the Pride parades of the 1970s onward, a group of protesters in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania marched in front of Independence Hall on July 4, 1965 for what they call Reminder Day. Reminder Day, which would continue for 5 years, was to draw attention to the lack of civil rights for the LGBT community. This was essentially an early Pride parade and helped set the stage for the Julius Bar Sip-In and the Stonewall riots. Number 12. The Julius Bar Sip-In. On April 21, 1966, members of the Mattachine Society in New York City staged the Sip-In at the Julius Bar. 3 members of the society, John Timmons, Dick Leach, and Randy Wicker, approached the bartender, asked for service, and made sure that the bartender knew they were gay. In fear of losing their license, the bartender refused service to the men by putting his hand over the glasses. Shortly after, the men filed a complaint for, quote, unconstitutionally discriminating against homosexuals in violation of the First and 14th Amendments, unquote. As to why the Julius Bar in particular was chosen, it was because the other 2 bars the men wanted to target failed. The first bar, the Village Bar, heard about the group's plan and closed early. The second bar, a Howard Johnson's, served them without any issue. This demonstration, while small-scale in comparison to other events, was considered a turning point in queer rights, as more eyes now than ever before were on the queer community and helped set the stage for Stonewall and other riots. And to anyone wondering, the Julius Bar is still open as of June 13, 2024, aka the writing of this script. Number 13. The San Francisco Cafeteria Riot. In August of 1966, a group of trans customers and drag queens became irate at a cafeteria in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco after being harassed. Cops were called, where one of them aggressively grabbed a drag queen. She threw hot coffee in his face, and all hell broke loose. Many people eating at the cafeteria rioted in the streets in support of the trans patrons who were being unjustly arrested. The riot only lasted 1 night, but it was a turning point for those who were genderqueer, as it showed that queer rights were not just for gay people. Plus, the riot led to the National Transsexual Counseling Unit, the first peer-run support group for genderqueer people in the whole world. Number 14. The Stonewall riots began a new era of activism. The Stonewall Inn was a popular gay bar owned by the Mafia in New York City. Just like many other gay bars of the era, it was a victim of many raids, as same-sex relationships and activities were still illegal, including selling alcohol to queer folk, even if they were over the age of 21. Because the bar was owned by the Mafia, they were frequently tipped off by the New York City police, but they wouldn't tell the patrons. This led to queer people being at high risk of police brutality, arrest, harassment, and many other attacks. On the night of June 28th, 1969, Stonewall was raided yet again, and yet again, the owners were tipped off ahead of time. But this night was different. After finding out that the Mafia owned the bar and were tipped off, as well as being generally done with homophobia, the patrons of the Stonewall Inn, which mostly consisted of young gay men and young trans people, began to riot in the streets in a protest that hadn't been seen this large since the San Francisco cafeteria riots of 1966. The rioting lasted until July 3, 1969, with the Stonewall Inn closing later that year. The Stonewall riots are considered a turning point in queer history, and it started Pride Month, Pride parades, and even the LGBT community as we know it today. Number 15. The first Pride parade was held. On the 1-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, a parade was held in New York City, nearby where Stonewall stood. The parade was referred to as the Christopher Street Liberation Day Parade and marched down 6th Avenue towards Central Park. The parade attracted thousands of queer folk from all over New York and began the tradition of Pride parades, a tradition that we still see to this day. Number 16. The Upstairs Lounge Arson Incident. Trigger warning for arson. The Upstairs Lounge was a popular gay bar for closeted gay men situated on the 2nd floor of an old building in New Orleans, Louisiana. On June 24th, 1973, a patron doused the stairwell in lighter fluid and set them ablaze. Within minutes, the whole bar was engulfed in flames. Unfortunately, the bar lacked proper fire safety equipment, emergency exits, and the windows were covered with bars. Because of this, many patrons were trapped inside, and sadly, 32 men had lost their lives. The incident caused the permanent shutdown of the upstairs lounge, as it would never reopen following the fire. It was considered the deadliest attack on the LGBT community up until the Pulse nightclub shooting of 2016, as well as the deadliest fire in New Orleans history. Number 17. Gayness is no longer considered a mental illness. On December 15, 1973, 11 years after it was included in the DSM-1, homosexuality was removed from the DSM-2 and has not been included in any form of the DSM since. This also repealed Executive Order 10450, as it was based on the idea that homosexuality was indeed a mental illness. Number 18. The first openly gay person holds office. In January of 1972, 21-year-old Kathy Kozanchenko becomes the first openly gay person to hold a public office in America when she became the member of the Michigan City Council as part of the Human Rights Party. Her platform was based on protecting queer people from being fired and evicted for being queer. She only served one term, retiring from politics in 1976 and proceeds to live a normal life. Number 19. The Save Our Children initiative began. In January of 1977, Dade County in Florida passed an ordinance that supported gay rights and would be one of the first counties in the country to do so. This ordinance upset conservative Baptist singer Anita Bryant. Bryant created the organization Save Our Children in order to get the ordinance repealed. Save Our Children focused on the idea that because gay people are unable to reproduce, they have to recruit children as if they were some sort of a cult, as well as treating queer folk as if they were pedophiles. If this mindset sounds familiar, this is because it's the same argument that modern conservatives use to justify their queerphobic ways. Unfortunately, Save Our Children succeeded in having the ordinance repealed and strengthened the arguments of the far right. Even though Save Our Children no longer exists, their message influenced many politicians to this day. Number 20. Harvey Milk becomes an influence for queer people and is then assassinated. On November 8, 1977, San Francisco Board of Supervisors member Harvey Milk, an openly gay man, introduced a bill that prevents openly gay people from being fired for being gay. Milk also led a successful campaign against Prop 6, which would have banned openly gay people from being teachers. These bills made Milk somewhat of a local celebrity for the queer community in San Francisco. However, he would only be in office for about a year, as on November 27, 1978, he was assassinated by disgruntled former city supervisor Dan White, along with San Francisco Mayor George Moscone. It is important to note that White did not kill Milk because he was gay. Rather, it was because he was jealous and spiteful. Number 21. The very first pride flag was flown. On June 25, 1978, the very first pride flag was raised during the San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Parade. The flag, which had 8 stripes, was created by drag performer Gilbert Baker, entirely by hand with the help of volunteers and friends. The 8 colors represent a portion of the queer community. Pink represented sex and love, red life and vitality, orange healing, yellow the sun, green nature, turquoise art and magic, blue serenity, and purple the spirit. The flag was redesigned to remove the pink stripe, as pink dye was extremely difficult to get at the time. The flag was then redesigned again to remove the turquoise stripe, creating the 6-stripe flag that was used to represent the queer community up until about 2018, when it was partially replaced with the Progress flag. Number 22. White was convicted for killing Milk. A few months after the death of Harvey Milk, his killer, Dan White, was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 7 years in prison. This led to rioting, as many people believed the sentence was way too lenient. The next day, 10,000 people gathered in the Castro district of San Francisco to commemorate what should have been Milk's 49th birthday. 2 years after he was released, White would take his own life on October 21, 1985. Number 23. The March for Civil Rights. On October 14, 1979, about 75,000 people marched in Washington, D.C. for queer rights, one of the largest protests of that era. This march would have been known as the National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. Number 24. The Democratic Party makes a statement on discrimination. On July 8, 1980, the Democratic Party made a statement that they will not discriminate on the basis of sexuality. This makes them the first major political party to advocate for queer rights. Number 25. AIDS hits the U.S. On June 5, 1981, the CDC published a report requesting a drug to treat a deadly disease known as PCP, a type of pneumonia that has been found in formerly healthy men. The report also stated that there was a spike in Kaposi sarcoma, a type of cancer that causes lesions. KS was found primarily in gay men. These two illnesses were once rare and associated with immunocompromised individuals. Later that summer, the CDC sent out a task force to gather and study samples of people who had PCP and KS, as they suspected that the illnesses causing these conditions was spread via sexual contact. They found a unique virus that suppressed the immune system and named it GRID, or Gay-Related Immunodeficiency. The name came from the idea that only gay activities could result in the illness. As one may assume, the name and its association with the gay communities resulted in heavy amounts of stigma, levels that hadn't been seen since the pre-Stonewall era. But change was on the horizon. In the fall of 1981, it was found that heterosexual people who shared needles were also contracting the illness, and by 1982, straight people were also getting ill from having sex. The name had to be changed, as it wasn't just gay people getting the illness. The name was changed from GRID to AIDS, or Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome for long. They also called the virus that causes AIDS HIV, or Human Immunodeficiency Virus. Number 26. Wisconsin bans sexual discrimination. On March 2, 1982, the state of Wisconsin became the first state to ban discrimination for job, housing, and schools based on sexual and gender orientation. Number 27. ACT UP is founded. On March 10, 1987, 6 years after the start of the AIDS epidemic, the group AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, shortened to ACT UP, was founded to raise awareness on the effects of AIDS in the gay communities of New York. The group also protested against Big Pharma, who was profiting off of the medications used to treat HIV and AIDS, advocating for protections from price gouging. Believe it or not, the organization still exists as of the making of this video. I'll leave a link in the video description if you want to go and support them. Number 28. President Reagan is forced to address the AIDS epidemic. During his presidency in the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan remained pretty quiet when asked about the topic of AIDS. It was as if he and the US government of the time were ignoring the epidemic. This pissed off a ton of people, especially those who had AIDS or were otherwise affected by the illness. It got to a breaking point on October 11, 1987, when hundreds of thousands of people marched in Washington, D.C., demanding President Reagan address the epidemic. Reagan did begrudgingly address AIDS, but it wasn't until the very end of his presidency, and by then it was too little, too late. Number 29. Don't Ask, Don't Tell is enacted. On December 21, 1993, the U.S. Department of Defense issued a statement that prevented applicants from joining any branch of the U.S. military based on their sexual orientation. This meant that if a person was openly gay, they were not allowed to serve. However, if they were not open, then they were allowed to serve. This act was referred to as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This act would not be repealed until December 18, 2010, nearly 20 years later. Number 30. The case of Romer v. Evans. In 1992, the state of Colorado passed Amendment 2, which prevented state and local governments from passing anti-discrimination laws specifically relating to queer rights. This amendment was supported by Colorado for Family Values, an evangelical Christian conservative group. This unsettled Denver Administrator Richard G. Evans so much that he sued Colorado Governor Roy Romer for allowing this amendment to even occur in the first place. The case was later taken up by the federal Supreme Court, who ruled that Amendment 2 violated the U.S.'s 14th Amendment, specifically the Equal Protection Clause. This case helped set the grounds for the influential case of Lawrence v. Texas. Number 31. President Clinton signs the Defense of Marriage Act. On September 21, 1996, then-President Bill Clinton signs the Defense of Marriage Act, which stated that a legal marriage must be between a cisgendered man and a cisgendered woman, no exceptions. The law also stated that no state had the obligation to recognize any same-sex marriage from out of state. This law would remain in effect until February 23, 2011. Number 32. A civil rights legend joins the fight. On April 1, 1998, Coretta Scott King, the widow of Martin Luther King Jr., joins the LGBT movement and urges other civil rights members to join as well. This decision was actually criticized by some members of the civil rights movement as they believed civil rights and queer rights were different issues. King would continue to fight for queer rights until her death in 2006. Number 33. President Clinton recognizes Pride Month. On June 11, 1999, then-President Bill Clinton signed Proclamation 7203. This proclamation officially recognized June as National Pride Month and still continues to this day. Number 34. Vermont becomes the first state to allow civil unions. On April 26, 2000, Vermont became the first state to allow civil unions for same-sex couples. Basically, Vermont legalized gay marriage without legalizing gay marriage, as the only difference between marriage and a civil union is that the latter is not recognized on a federal level. Number 35. The case of Lawrence v. Texas. On June 26, 1998, Texan John Lawrence was hosting two gay friends when one of them stormed off during an argument. That bitter friend then called the police, who barged their way in only to find Lawrence having sex with another friend. Keep in mind that gay activities were still illegal in the state at the time. Lawrence and his friend were detained due to Texas's sodomy laws. This led to Lawrence suing the state of Texas in 2003, believing that sodomy laws were unconstitutional. The federal Supreme Court agreed with Lawrence and determined that sodomy laws in general are unconstitutional and violate the 14th Amendment. This case became a landmark in queer history, as gay sex was finally now legal. Number 36. The first states legalize gay marriage. On May 18, 2004, Massachusetts becomes the first state to legalize gay marriage beyond a civil union. New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Iowa, and Washington, D.C. all followed suit within the next 6 years. New York would legalize gay marriage in 2011, becoming the largest state to do so. Number 37. The first American Presidential Forum for Queer Issues is aired. On August 9, 2007, the cable channel Logo, with the support of the Human Rights Campaign, hosted the first American Presidential Forum dedicated to queer issues. All presidential candidates for the 2008 presidential election were invited. 6 Democrats joined, including 2016 presidential candidate and former First Lady Hillary Clinton and soon-to-be President Barack Obama. No Republicans participated. Number 38. Prop 8 is approved. On November 4, 2008, California voters approved Prop 8, which banned same-sex marriage in the state. This sparks widespread protests all over the country. Less than 2 years later, on August 4, 2010, a federal judge deemed Prop 8 to be unconstitutional, violating the 14th Amendment. Number 39. Same-sex partners of federal employees can now get benefits. On June 17, 2009, then-President Barack Obama signed a presidential memo that allowed same-sex partners of federal employees to receive specific benefits, specifically the Federal Long-Term Care Insurance, which allows government employees and their partners assisted pay should they need care due to disability or old age. Number 40. The Matthew Shepard Act. This law acts as an extension of the 1969 Federal Hate Crime Law. The federal hate crime law allows crimes based on a person's race, sex, and disability to be considered felonies. The Matthew Shepard Act extended this to include sexual orientation and gender identity. The act was named after late college student Matthew Shepard, who was brutally tortured and killed on October 6, 1998 due to him being a gay man. Number 41. Obergefell versus Hodges and the legalization of gay marriage federally. Ohio resident James Obergefell had been in a committed relationship with his partner John Arthur, who was sadly diagnosed with ALS. The two wanted to get married before it was too late, but they couldn't get married in Ohio. So the couple flew to Anne Arundel County in the state of Maryland, as Maryland was one of the states that had legal gay marriage at the time. The two married in the plane on the tarmac before flying home to Ohio. There was one glaring issue, though. Ohio refused to recognize their marriage. In response, Obergefell sued the district court respondent Richard Hodges. The case was brought to the federal Supreme Court in 2015, where it was determined that Ohio not recognizing Obergefell and Arthur's marriage went against the 14th Amendment. This decision officially made gay marriage legal and recognizable in all 50 U.S. states and Washington, D.C. Number 42. The Pulse nightclub shooting. Trigger warning for mass shooting. The Pulse nightclub was a popular gay bar and nightclub in Orlando, Florida. On the night of June 12, 2016, the club became the target of a potentially religious-fueled mass shooting. The gunman, who will not be named, burst in and started firing. 49 people lost their lives, and more than 50 were injured. The shooting plagued the nightclub, and it shut its doors that very night. The remains of the club became a memorial, where the pictures of the victims are hung and candlelight vigils are held. The attack became the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history until the Las Vegas shooting that took place 1 year later. It also became the deadliest attack on the queer community since the upstairs arson of 1973. Number 43. A new queer pride flag takes over. Since the creation of the original rainbow flag in 1978, many artists have created their own variations and new flags to represent the many facets of the LGBT. One flag has stood out among the rest, the Progress flag. The Progress flag was created by non-binary artist Daniel Quasar in 2018. The flag takes the rainbow flag and adds chevrons of light pink and blue, brown, and black. The light pink and blue represent the trans flag created by trans woman Monica Helms in 1999. The brown represents queer people of color as found on the Philly Pride flag created by Amber Hikes in 2017. The black stripe represents those who lost the battle against AIDS, found in the Victory Over AIDS flag created by Sergeant Leonard Matlovich. The chevron shape was chosen to represent the community moving forward. The flag was also updated to include a yellow triangle with a purple ring, based on the intersex flag created by Australian Morgan Carpenter in 2013. The new flag has been widely adopted as the current symbol of the queer community, although some still do use the original design. Number 44. Conservatives begin to push back on the queer community again. While there has always been queerphobia, conservative lawmakers have been rather quiet since Obergefell in 2015. But they were indeed scheming. Starting in 2016, many conservative states began introducing what are called bathroom bills. Bathroom bills are state laws that prevent trans people from using the bathroom of their choice. According to the supporters of these bills, they're put in place to prevent men from sexually assaulting women in bathrooms. In actuality, these bills do nothing but oppress trans people. But this isn't the only thing conservatives have wrote into law. Over the last 2 years, Florida and its governor Ron DeSantis have been in the news frequently for its infamous bill, Parental Rights in Education, commonly referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill. The Don't Say Gay bill forbids teachers from discussing or even mentioning anything relating to the LGBT community to kids between the ages of 5 and 9, if they're even allowed to say anything at all. This, as well as the bathroom bills, have resulted in many lawsuits and debates, many of which that are still ongoing. There are other examples of the brain rot of the right, but this video is already long enough. Number 45. Pete Buttigieg becomes the first openly gay person to serve on the U.S. cabinet. On January 20th, 2021, former South Bend mayor and U.S. naval officer Pete Buttigieg becomes the first confirmed gay person to serve on the cabinet, becoming the Secretary of Transportation. He also ran in the 2020 U.S. presidential election before dropping out in March of 2020. Number 46. The Club Q shooting. Trigger warning for shooting. Club Q was a gay bar found in Colorado Springs, Colorado that was the victim of a shooting on November 19th, 2022. The shooting was the result of hatred towards the queer community. 5 people lost their lives and many more were injured. The shooter, who will once again not be named, recently was sentenced to life in prison on 74 different federal charges and will never be granted parole. Unlike Pulse, Club Q is still open as of 2023 but is at a new location and is now referred to as the Q. The old location has plans to become a permanent memorial. Number 47. The respect for marriage law. And finally, let's end this video on a high note. In 2022, current, as of the making of this video, President Joe Biden enacted the Respect for Marriage Law, replacing the Defense of Marriage Act and forcing all states to recognize same-sex and interracial marriages. And there you have it, 47 of the most influential events in US queer history. If you want to leave a comment with something I may have left out, something you want to add, any of your own experiences, etc., comment the word Stonewall so I know you watched the whole thing. If you want to know more about the queer history, especially if you're from outside the US, I highly encourage you all to fall down your own rabbit holes. Anyway, that's all from me today. Peace, love, and Roxy!